We are super honored to have Dean Anderson here today to moderate this conversation with Christian Gardner, and Christian Gardner is going to be the main speaker today. So to provide a little bit of introduction, Christian Gardner is the chairman and CEO of the Gardner Company, a full-service real estate company specializing in the development of corporate office, retail, industrial, and medical buildings. He received a bachelor's degree from the University of Utah and a master's of science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Christian is active in many community and charitable causes, including the Board of Directors of the United Way, the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and the Board of the Pioneer Theater Company. He also serves in the chair of the Board of Trustees of the University of Utah. And I will now turn it over to Dean Anderson.
I just want to say it's such a pleasure to have Christian here. And I want you a little bit background of my relationship with Christian. In the fall of 1971, I was here at Utah State as an undergraduate, and Christian's father, Ken Gardner, came up to Logan looking to hire an intern to work in Senator Moss's office in Washington, D.C. And I was the lucky guy that got chosen. And so I went back and spent the summer of 1972 in Washington, D.C., working with his dad and getting to know his mom. And Christian, I think that was the year you were born, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
So I have literally known Christian all of his life. And he's a lot closer to your age than he is to mine. But I have to say that I realized that he's like the big 5-0 this year. And that seems so young to me, you know.
Oh,
and I know,
funny.
I know you're looking at him and saying, "Boy, that's an old guy. Where'd they get him?" So I'm intentionally trying to embarrass him just a little bit. The next big time that we connected together was when his family moved to Boston in 1985, and I was living in the same town they moved in. His dad came back to serve as mission president for his church during that time. And they lived literally a mile away from us. And so I reconnected with Christian that time. We hung out a little bit.
We did. And did they all know what you were doing there at the time?
I'm not sure if they all do, but this is about you, Christian.
No, let's make it about you. You're more interesting.
I can see one good turn deserves another,
Yeah.
right? So continue on with the story. 3 years back in Boston together, and it turns out that that another person living in the same town, Belmont, Massachusetts at that time, was our mutual good friend Mitt Romney, and Christian and his family got to know the Romneys very well, and now fast forward from 1988, the end of that period, to 2000. Well, actually around 1999, and you probably know the story about Utah being in kind of a mess as it related to the Olympics, going into the Olympics. And Mitt came out and essentially saved the Olympics and put on an amazing Olympics experience. And Utah became kind of the darling of the Olympics because not only was it a great experience, but we actually created a surplus, which everybody thought was impossible to do. The person who was responsible for bringing Mitt out to the Olympics was his father, Ken Gardner. So I say all of that by way of introduction of my relationship with the family and with Christian himself, and maybe he has a few things that he can add to that in terms of elaboration. But two other things I want to just say. Christian also has some significant Logan connections as well. His mother's mother, so his grandmother, grew up here in Logan, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Christian, and about your mother's connection to Cache Valley as well. And then one other thing I want to say before we get into our discussion, and that is that Christian is and has been a member of the Board of Trustees of our sister institution down south, who likes to refer to them as the state's flagship university. What they don't know down there is that Utah has two navies. They have an Atlantic Navy and they have a Pacific Navy. And they're very happy we're happy to have them choose to be the flagship of one of those oceans. We're the flagship of the other ocean, okay? And much as we want to really, how do I say this politely? Let's just say destroy Utah on the football field and the basketball court. Everything else, we're all working on the same mission. We want you guys in your generation to be as successful as you possibly can. Whether you go to Utah or whether you go to Utah State, it's irrespective. And you all are brand leaders for the state of Utah. And outside of the state of Utah, really, there's only one brand, and that is, you're from Utah, so we know that you're honest, and we know you're hardworking. And we're trying to do our part to lift that up. So anyway, Christian, could you just tell us a little bit about your history, your story, your family's story?
Well, I'd love to. Let me just pick up that thread that you were talking about on the two institutions. So we're both, the University of Utah and Utah State University are both the two R1, research institutions in the state. And I believe combined, we have in research and grants over $1 billion annually between the two. And that's really impressive, and I know our trajectory, and I know Utah State's as well, is it's continuing to go up, and I can see the day in the not too distant future where that's at $2 billion and growing. And we did a study, and one of the things at the university, one of the things we found is that there's basically a 4x multiple of economic impact for every dollar of research and grants that come into the institutions. And so when I've worked with David Huntsman and some Ken Alder, others on your trustees to say that is something we should be really screaming from the rooftops, especially as you get into the legislative cycles and everything, of the job creation and the economic impact that the University of Utah and Utah State have is tremendous. You think of the jobs and just the spin-off companies and everything. It's really remarkable, and it's something that. So yes, I'm at the University of Utah, but so proud of what Utah State is doing. In fact, I was with our president, President Randall, and we went down and toured your Eastern Utah campus in Price just a few weeks ago, and we were actually we're going back down in a few weeks to meet further and do more collaborations, especially as you get into some of the areas in rural Utah that have been harder hit with some of the energy transitions that you see going on from fossil fuel based to more renewable based, and there's a lot of ways that the research institutions, Utah State, University of Utah, can really help these areas in promoting new businesses, educating, and it was kind of fun because we were meeting with some of the Utah State researchers and talking about new technologies that they're working on in that space, in coal extraction, clean coal, carbon capture, battery technologies. There's so much. And
our president gives your dad credit for the idea of the Land, Air, and Water Institute, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They were having lunch together one day, and he said, with all the expertise that Utah State has in land, air, and water, you really ought to create an institute. We have done that now, and we're very proud of that, and recognize it as an important part of contribution we can make to the state.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at Utah State. So University of Utah, we're more geographically constrained. We're Salt Lake County. We don't really have the mandate like Utah State to go beyond those borders. And, you drive around here in the States and I look at where you have schools and it's so so needed, and it's great because 29 counties.
And I don't know that everybody
we need to impact them all.
in this room really understands the fact that Utah State, as the land-grant institution of the state, has a responsibility to have a presence in each one of those 29 counties, which we do, and have an outreach responsibility. You understand that very well.
Yeah. So I know this may sound a little boring, but the role of a research institution in the state is tremendous. And you look at some of like the research triangles out east, and you get North Carolina, you get University of Utah and Utah State collaborating and working together. It benefits the state.
Huge.
Yeah, it is big, and it's something that we need to keep working on. And all of you, kind of as you get into that next generation, you'll be taking those jobs and leading that charge.
I don't want to take you too far off of economic development because it's a really important one. So let's talk about the Olympics for just a minute. What did you observe during that period of time of the Olympics?
Oh, it's funny. So I want to maybe back up when you talked about Mitt then, or Mr. Romney and Senator Romney now. As a teenager, you probably all maybe felt like you didn't take advantage of every opportunity. When you were teenagers, mostly, you still maybe, but I was one. So here I'm growing up. I'm 14, 15. I've got Doug that I know, Senator Romney. Clayton Christensen was, I knew he was doing, tremendous things. And I was kind of a clueless 14, 15-year-old and didn't really appreciate the smart people and that I was surrounded with. But it was funny because a few years later in 1999, I had thought a lot about that. Like, I need to kind of regret some of those days. But anyway, I was with... my dad poked his head in my office and said, "Hey, I'm going to the airport to pick up Mitt. Do you want to come say hello to him?" And I said, "Sure." So I jump in the back. I go to the airport. Senator Romney jumps in, or Mitt at the time, and I get in the back seat, and they start talking about the Olympics. And it happened to be he was in for the interview. And I remember they went to the governor's mansion, and I kind of felt like, wow, I'm kind of watching this from the back seat. It was really, really kind of neat to see as they were talking and talking about what it would be like, or what the games needed to be, and the problems and the challenges. And I remember we get to the governor's mansion, and I was like, this is pretty cool. I'm going to see how this happens. And I remember they got out, and I started to get out, and my dad said, "Why don't you just wait right here for a minute?" And an hour later, I finally realized they're not coming back for me. So I ended up walking home, but it was, I did.
From the governor's mansion.
From the governor's mansion, but it was incredible to just kind of hear and understand the complexity of the issues and what was going on. And from the Olympics, leading up into that, you see it so much. It was all about Utah being recognized for what a great state we are. Yeah. And we were all talking, at the time it was all about the publicity, and we have all the great parks, and we got this great economy and everything, and we're going to be discovered. And I would say we've been discovered. I mean, look at the growth.
The Olympics was a big part of a strategy that your dad and a bunch of other people invented 20 years before the Olympics, at least 20 years before the Olympics, when a decision was made by the folks that really controlled the economic development strategy in the state to create Utah, and in the Utah, a reputation as a winter sports recreation paradise. I mean, that was a very self-conscious decision that they made, and the Olympics became a part of that, and it didn't happen for at least 20 years after that strategy was formally adopted.
Yeah, and you're still seeing the the benefits from it. I mean, from the facilities, they're constantly used. I mean, Utah really
has been discovered.
It has been discovered, and now so many people know. I mean, we're dealing with some of the challenges.
Yeah, there are a few externalities associated with being discovered.
Yeah, there's affordability issues. There's congestion. There's a lot of issues that I think that we all need to be participating in solving the problems. And I mean, we can talk about this later, but I really think that's something that I feel personally, and I know my dad, the family, our company, is that we want to be part of the solutions.
I want to take you in
Utah.
that direction now.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get back to Logan in your heritage.
Well, I can just tell you, Logan, briefly, I would come up here a lot. My mom wasn't born here, but both of my grandparents were and lived here. And part of there was a bank called Barnes Bank a few years, and it was one of Utah's older, and it was great. And unfortunately, didn't make it through the Great Recession. But that was my mom's side, Barnes's, and both of my grandparents are buried up here in the Logan Cemetery. We'd go to the Bluebird all the time on family reunions, and so share quite an affinity to Logan.
Just tell quickly the story about how your grandmother, at age 17, became a student at the New England Conservatory in Boston, and how that happened.
You know, and my grandmother, she is amazing. She lived to be 101. And she was ahead of her time. She was, progressive. She wanted to go out. She wanted to get an education. She was born in 1900, so this was, early on. And at that time, as you mentioned before, people would say, don't spend the money on the education, on a woman. That's not on her. That's not worth it. But she ended up going out to Boston to the New England Conservatory of Music, graduated in half the time, took double load, to save money, and she also wanted to prove a point, and she finished valedictorian, which is, to me, is remarkable.
She was put on a train here in Logan, knowing nobody.
At 17.
And went back herself. Talk about dare mighty things.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing story.
It is. And
I knew your grandmother. In fact, you mentioned the Bluebird. I think you might have been there. I was invited to your parents' home for a Sunday dinner back in the early 90s. And your grandmother was there. And the Bluebird was going through some problems here in Logan, and it was for sale.
Oh.
And I was considering buying the Bluebird, and I brought a box of chocolates, and I asked your grandmother what she thought. She bit into it. She said, it doesn't taste as good as Cummins. And I did not buy the Bluebird on the strength of your grandmother's recommendation as a result. Now, I think the Bluebird is back to better shape than it was back then. But that was, I remember her, she was very direct about that.
Yeah. And remember, her degree was in music. and
not chocolatry.
Not her business. But she was phenomenal. I loved her. She was great. Passed away about 15, 20 years ago.
So let's talk about the business. So your dad was up here a number of years ago. We had him in the Dean's Convocation like we're doing today. And at that time, we were studying a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And the idea behind Blue Ocean Strategy is you want to find a blue ocean because that's where the opportunity for innovation and creativity is. You don't want to be in a red ocean. The red ocean is where the sharks are all swimming around, it's win-lose, and there's blood in the water. So your dad talked about that he had just graduated from law school. He had a terrific job opportunity in Newport, California, which he thought would have been a great place to be. But his friend, Roger Boyer, came to him and said, I've got a great idea, Kim, and I think you and I could really work together. What if we borrowed $1 billion and made commercial offices and rented it out to people and they paid off of our mortgage. When the mortgage was paid off, we would have $1 billion. And your dad said that was a blue ocean for him. And he changed his whole orientation as a result. Now you're running that business today, or the one of the two businesses, because the Boyers and you guys reached an amicable agreement about almost 20 years ago. Is it 18 years ago now?
Yes.
To separate the assets. Both companies have done very well, and you keep collaborating with each other. But you're now running the Gardner Company. Tell us a little bit, bring us up to date from 2004 to 2022, and how you are repositioning the company now.
Okay, I'll try and make this interesting. But so in 2002, well, let's back up. As you know from your studies, family-owned businesses have unique sets of challenges. I'm in one, I can attest. They're great, and they have some unique challenges, one of which is succession, and how does that go on? And at the time, the real estate company, my dad and Roger Boyer, was the Boyer Company, and you had two families in it, which arguably could be even harder with some of those challenges. But everybody got along great, and it was fun. But they made the determination that going forward, it'd be best to kind of continue to own and operate everything together, but to maybe do things independent as well. And I was just coming out of graduate school and approached my dad on, well, why don't we continue to go forward with what we're doing and what we've been doing and real estate development. And I always had an eye on diversifying. I said, this would be a great opportunity for us to kind of to pursue other things, but to also involve other of our family members and other people we knew. So in 2004, we started the Gardner Company, and when we say full service, meaning that we do everything from land acquisition through design and entitlements, and we don't physically build the buildings, but we hire contractors, in Oakland, Jacobson, Big D, but we manage that construction and on through the property management. And so we did that, and we actually developed quite a niche in corporate headquarter buildings over the years.
Just name some of the ones you've done in Utah and Idaho that people would
recognize. So any like Adobe, the Adobe campus in Lehigh, that is one, and we did one for CHG, Overstock.com, which is a round building. Pluralsight, that if you've seen that in Draper. In Sandy, there's an 11-story one, which is one of the taller buildings outside of the Central Business District. We did that for Mountain America.
The new Zions building, Platinum.
Yeah, we just finished one for Zions.
In Midvale. Dave's hometown.
Yes, and it's the state's first Platinum building to the new energy code. 75% of the building is offset with on-site solar and renewables. But I got to just tell you a funny story. When we went out to San Jose to pitch on the Adobe building, and I was younger and kind of like looking to impress, and I put on like this, put on my tie.
By the way, we appreciate the Aggie colors.
I know, I even wore my Aggie socks. This was, I'm trying to represent. But I got there to San Jose and walked in, and I did not get a great welcoming because I'm in my suit and I'm in the tech headquarters. And it was, who's this guy? Who's this stiff? And I learned a great lesson is if you're, trying to bid or win somebody's business and you're claiming that you know them, you really have to know them and understand their culture. And it was a great learning experience because I realized that what they wanted and what the purpose of their building, it's not a building for them. It was a a solution to a lot of the things at the time they were trying to solve for. They had just acquired a new company, and they were merging them in, and there was this cultural components they were trying to do, and all these things. And I remember meeting at the time with, I believe it was their COO, just trying to say, like, do you really
get us?
Do you get us?
Yeah.
Do you understand us and what we're trying to do? And that's really informed a lot of how we've gone about doing things ever since then.
You've been so successful in that regard. In fact, your purpose, as you describe it on your website, is to be community builders. And I'm getting the sense from what you're saying right now, that doesn't mean just in terms of like building streets and parks and retail and so forth. Like, that's a community, but you're also talking about a building itself being community builder.
Yes. Yeah, I look at the economic impact that the revitalization. I mean, so we're the Zions Bank, or it's their Zions Technology Center, and it's just opened up. That's on 500 acres of Superfund site right in the middle of right off I-15, just west of I-15, right in the middle of Midvale City.
You all know what a Superfund site is? I mean, just define Superfund site.
Well, it's a site that the EPA has determined poses blighted and poses some health risk, some environmental risk. And the EPA had gone through what they call a remedy. They remedied it to the point that they had just covered it, and that was how it was to be left.
Yeah.
And we came in and bought it, worked with the EPA to redevelop the site, to come up with, at the time, institutional controls. Did you dig up all that stuff? We dug up some of it, but part of the institutional controls were, what do we do with the dirt?
Yeah.
I mean, at that time it was some ballast stuff. It was over on the other side. There was two phases to it. They had put a kind of like a big visqueen layer over 200 and something acres, because it was heavier metals, and the metals go down over time. So it's not anything coming up, but they put the barrier there because they didn't want any water to come in, go down into the metals, and then leach into the groundwater, or where we're right by is the Jordan River.
Yeah.
So to me, I take a great deal of pride in coming in and redeveloping that and making it economically viable.
What did that take to mitigate that site?
Well, it took a couple of years of working with the EPA, and the EPA actually uses this as an example of a successful redevelopment of a Superfund site. But it takes everything from how do we deal with the soils, if we penetrate the soils, if we dig any trenches. There's just a lot of technical stuff. Geotechnically, the ground's not great, so we had to build a lot of things on piers and piles. But one of the things, and I'll get the numbers slightly wrong, but we did a study, and the economic impact to Midvale is the taxable value of that land in its Superfund condition. I can't remember. It was in the, we'll just say $20,000. And
now?
Now it's around $850 million on
just that side.
On just the one side, and then we're working on the next one.
And the tax revenue.
And so you get the tax revenue.
And just point out that, just think about the impact that this is going to have on Midvale schools, where Dave went to high school, and where some of you may also have gone to high school. And now, not only is it not a Superfund site, but it's got a LEED Platinum building, the first of its kind. And how many square feet? 165,000?
400,000.
400,000. And that's what your purpose is, to do stuff like that. You did that also with the weren't you involved with the IHC campus in Murray?
Yeah.
Which was also a Superfund site.
That was. There were some big smokestacks. If you go Google it, you can... I remember watching those. We went there early on a Sunday morning and watched as they blew those up, and
fell down.
They fell down. It was in the 90s, and And it was great to see. And now you look at what's there and the innovation and everything that's coming
So
from
a couple of quick questions.
Intermountain.
How important is purpose to you in the business that you're running?
It's everything. So I could show you a text I shared with my family on that I really, and they, all of them agree that we want to be a purpose-driven family.
Yeah.
That what we do is great. But my dad's always taught us that it's the company, the business, and what we do is more of a means to the end. And the end is giving back and community building. And it can be through our work. It can be addressing affordable housing issues through real estate. It can be in philanthropy. It can be in working, and especially in our time, and working with nonprofits. I like to think that if we can help areas in eastern Utah and others on the energy transition, that's our role, is we're to be community-minded. And I look at the building we're in. I mean, there's some great leaders. This morning, I was at the University of Utah. We just broke ground on our new medical school from a generous gift of the Eccles family of $110 million. And, I mean, it's incredible. And then I come up here, and there's how many Eccles buildings?
Well, we're in one of them, right?
Yeah, we're in one. Yeah. And there were, the Huntsmans, and I think
there are about 4 or 5 Eccles buildings.
Well, and we have 4 or 5 at the U, and a medical, and I look at
a bridge, by the way.
And a bridge. And I look at the Huntsmans, too, and they're with their Huntsman Cancer, and they just gave a couple of years ago, I was able to be part of when we did a groundbreaking for the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. Yeah. And that was, I think, $150 million. Yeah. But Utah is there's so many families like that, and I'm just talking about those two, but there's a great tradition in Utah, and I see it, and we're in Idaho, and we're in about 15 other states with our renewable energy company. But it's unique, I think, to Utah that people coalesce and come together to help solve problems.
Just quickly, give us a sort of a framework, a reference point. How big is the company now? How many? What are some of the I'm talking about size. In terms of projects you've got underway, in terms of assets you've got, in terms of those kind of things. Give us a sense of what that is like.
I can tell you over the years we've developed over 30 combined, over 30 million square feet, and over $6 billion of financial transactions between construction debt and permanent debt, various financings. And we have a robust pipeline right now that we're excited to build, but we really are kind of focusing on our pipeline in terms of sustainability, promoting sustainability, and we have a lot of residential. But how do we help with the affordability issue? Yeah. How do we do that? We want to. And we do believe that you can do well while doing good, and we have that. What do they call that? The double bottom line.
Right. I want to give the students a chance to ask some questions, but I just want to take you back a little bit on how you made the decision personally to get into this business and how to prepare yourself personally to get into the business. Because my recollection is that you were actually headed to Wharton to get an MBA. When you decided that maybe getting a master's degree in real estate at MIT might be a better fit. Talk through that decision and how that was made.
I probably took a different route. Sometimes, growing up, and yet there's a family business there, and I grew up saying, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not doing that," and I'm going to be my own person, and little did I know you still can be your own person and work in the family business. But so that's what led to it, and I was pursuing some other things, and thinking more of a general business background would be great. But then I realized, I actually really, really like the family business. I like what it does. I like what it can do in the community. And I really wanted to be a part of it. And I felt that going back and getting that master's would be great. And while back there, I took a class at, I mentioned this to you before, at the Kennedy School of Government. And it was an environmental and energy studies class. And it was there that I was, this was early 2003, but it was a class that just fascinated me, and because we studied a lot on renewable energy. And I thought, boy, that would be great to merge the real estate background with renewable and be a renewable energy developer.
And that was like 2001,
2003.
2003, yeah. And so here we are 20 years later, and your dad gives you credit. By the way, Christian has just become the chairman and CEO of the company. He was president and CEO. His dad was chairman, and his dad is now emeritus, and he's turned the whole thing over to Christian. And I know from talking to your dad how much confidence he has and how proud he is of you, because he credits you with a complete shift in focus of the business towards renewable, towards sustainability, something he said he would not have thought of. He gives you credit for that. So
yeah, they were actually, he was really open to it, and I need to give him a lot.
You now have an energy company.
We do.
You're working with people like Rocky Mountain in creating this massive battery, I'm calling it a battery, in Nevada, where you create a reservoir on top of a mountain. It rushes down the mountain, turning hydro generators on peak. And then off peak, you pull the water back up to the mountain, on top of the mountain, and it's a sustainable cycle. You're doing that for them. It's a $2 billion project or something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
And you're taking a commission
in the early stages of it. Yeah. So so maybe backing up, I've always wanted to get into renewable energy, and then coming out of school, the market wasn't quite there, and the real estate market was really, really hot. And we got in, and we were building these great campuses and for companies, and it was a lot of fun. But a few years ago, I really became even more so concerned about the impacts of a changing climate and what it's doing. And I really wanted us to be part of the solution. Yeah. And I thought, and I had that, remembered the class, I took a few other classes and wanted to get into that, and ended up partnering with a gentleman who had built Utah's first solar project, and I got his name through the EDC Utah and reached out to this guy. I didn't know him. He was out of California. We ended up meeting and co-founding a renewable energy company called R+. And it's basically utility scale solar, wind, and storage. So we do some battery storage, but we also do what you're referring to, pump storage hydro, which is an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir. And it has some advantages over chemical-based storage. It also has some it's expensive too, but it's a great technology. It used to exist about 40 years ago. Europe and China, they do it still. They used to be paired with nuclear power because you would have big base load. And nuclear power doesn't really have the ability to ramp up or down. It kind of runs constant. So they would take the excess power when they weren't needed, pump it uphill. Let me just say a good example is we were meeting with the governor of a local state, and he was saying, doesn't it require more energy to pump up than you get going down, than releasing? And
The key is time of day.
The key is time of day, and that's what the utility company said. They said, "Oh, with all due respect, Governor, we're taking, California we're taking some of their excess power. Our solar's coming on at 6:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning. We don't have the demand for it. We're grounding it. We're trying to find somewhere to put it.
You either use it or lose it."
Yeah, and later in the day, we need it. So we would rather put that excess power to use, pump water up, and then release it later down. And they're, like your smartphones that after you charge and discharge so many times, they lose their charge. I mean, that's one of the nice things with pump storage hydro is you can go, it doesn't matter, as many times as you want, and they last a long time. But so we're in about 15 different states. We have about 34 projects in various stages. And we just broke ground in Emery County on a 200 megawatt project. I'm sorry, in Iron County. And so if you look, when we talk about community impact, that's roughly a couple $100 million. And you look at and again, I'll come back to the taxable value of what that does to a fallow field, and you look at the tax benefits that come back to the community without really any impact to the roads, parks, schools. I mean, it's and their jobs, short-term, construction jobs related to it, but the money's coming back in. And when we were in Carbon County, they were telling us that one of their county commissioners was saying that 2 years ago, they said was the first time in their history that no coal had been extracted.
Really?
And shipped out from the ground. And he said, we're really, really...
Yeah, they need something else.
We're really, really worried about that. And I am as well. And I think that, there's a lot of technologies. And I think technologies that can clean fossil fuels and renewables, but all those things can provide those jobs and help.
Let me just ask, is anybody from Carbon County here in the room? Do we have anybody from Carbon County? Raise your hand if you are. Nobody? You
know where Carbon County is? Just over Spanish Fork County. Yeah, Price.
Yeah. We should get some more people from Carbon County up here in Logan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, we could go on this whole time, but I want to give our Huntsman scholars an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have.
Yeah, please do. I feel like I'm just talking.
Anybody got a question? Who's got a first question? Right down here.
With all like the different facets of your business, and I feel like the economy is a little bit unsure about where it's going. It's like kind of going down. What are you doing to prepare for that in terms of like still staying successful to do that, and then also to prevent any job loss?
So let me repeat the question because we're taping this, Christian, if you don't mind, and others will have a chance to watch it afterwards. So the question was, with the economy being as uncertain and potentially a recession coming, what are you doing to prepare to get the company through that time?
That's a great question because we talk a lot about that. I will say one of the things that we started undertaking quite a few years ago, along with and what led going into renewable energy, is diversification. So we are trying to diversify and not just be a real estate development company. There's a few other businesses that we're going into. The other thing, so I want to be in different sectors of the economy, and within real estate too. I want to be in different asset classes, which we've done a good job of diversifying there and doing that. And then the other thing we're really doing is that we've focused on is not being over-levered and increasing our liquidity. And that, at times that's challenging because you look at this project and you think, oh, I want to own all of it. And, let's go all in. But as anyone that went through the Great Recession learned, that times change. And so having conservative approach. I remember a time my dad was telling me that I'd never make it as a developer because I was too conservative. And it was actually kind of a funny discussion. But so yes, you do need to take risks, but I think you can do that and manage it. But that's what we're trying
Nobody's
to do.
too conservative from the bottom of a recession.
No. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And they sting. Yes?
Another question?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier how you wish you had connected more with smart people as young adults. What advice do you have for us to better take advantage of that opportunity or in college?
So the question is, how can you all benefit from his experience in terms of taking advantage of the great networks and exposures you have to smart people at your age?
That is a great question. And I wish I wasn't being recorded because I don't want to get this wrong, but I went out to New York City a couple weeks ago with the United Way, and we were looking at we went toward what's called the Harlem Children's Zone, which was the cradle to career kind of wraparound services that a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Canada started, education innovator and community builder 20-something years ago. And it was a great model of getting kids through and on to college and increasing graduation rates and and then coming back and reinvesting in the community and everything. But I say that because one of the things they talked about in there, and I'll get the study, I'll look it up, but they were saying that for a child or in poverty, if they have just one or two connections with somebody in the middle class, those connections and networking increase, quite a bit. And I won't get the exact percentage right, but their ability to get out.
To rise out of poverty.
To rise out of it. And I was thinking about that because it's all about opportunities, that taking advantage of opportunities that we all have. And I, being at the University of Utah, I'm amazed at how many brilliant people I get to see on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not an academics, and nobody would ever confuse me for being an academician, or anything. But we
have a role for you here when you want to give up what you're doing.
But I look at your professors and your adjunct professors and your classmates, and just that networking base, but just the smart people, your guest lecturers, not me, but others that come in. There's going to be things that inspire you. I look at what a class did for me in wanting to get into renewable energy. I look at, sitting next to Doug and thinking, man, 30 years ago, I wish I'd had more of these kind of conversations.
That's what he's saying, and I know he's very sincere about that, but just remember, play back the tape when I say that my life was changed because I met his father when I was your age and got the opportunity to watch his dad operate in Washington, D.C., which was unlike anybody else I had ever seen. And he's been a mentor for me now for 50 years. And it's kind of changed my life. By the way, I would just say all of us in this room have been enormously benefited and are the recipients of the generosity of the Gardner family, and big time. And we have another building that's going to be built out in the parking center, and you can guess whose name's going to go on that building. That's all I'll say right now for the record. So,
we'll come up for that. I'd like to see that. But to your point, I really, really believe that. I know you do your internship programs. Don't miss the opportunity just to sit and learn.
We've got time for about
people.
One more question.
Yeah, sorry.
I think. Right over here.
As other vertically integrated developers come into the space in Utah, would you still consider the state to be a blue ocean? Are you on the lookout for other areas to kind of replicate the growth that Utah has seen, or are you staying pretty bullish on the area?
We're really bullish on Utah and the trajectory of Utah. And, there certainly are challenges. And actually, Utah State's working on so many of water issues, Great Salt Lake issues. There's things out there. And I just give my plug because I really appreciate what Utah State's doing. But let me say this. Real estate, the markets are changing here in Utah, and it's coming back full circle. Utah has discovered, and whereas the business that we're running now is different than the one my dad did. It's a lot more, there's a lot of institutional capital coming in. And I remember being in school, and they were talking about Wall Street is very much in the real estate world. And that has found its way big time into Utah. And it changes things.
When your family came back to Utah in 1988, there was virtually no venture capital business.
Right.
No venture capital in this state, no private equity, let alone institutional money for real estate. But that's completely changed.
It has. I mean, we're competing against big funds. Their cost of capital we can't touch. So we need to be innovative. We need to adapt if we're going to compete.
Yeah.
I mean, that blue ocean there's some sharks. Not that they're sharks, but it's a lot more competitive.
Yeah.
It's different.
It may be purple, if not red.
Yeah.
All right. Won't you join me in thanking Christian Gardner for this
Thank
hour?
you, guys.